Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
We often criticize, especially the big brands, for making changes simply for the sake of having something new, or it's not an uncommon scenario for a big brand to take a great pair of football boots that everybody loves and change it for something that is, simply put, worse. Where of course that's one of the more extreme examples, but you get what I'm saying. It happens all the time. But if we look at Adidas right now, a brand that I would argue offers a really solid lineup and has seen a tremendous amount of success over the last 2 years with their football boot offerings, instead of the traditional big brand way of coming out with new things until something catches on, they've effectively done the opposite, where they've gone back in time and really played the nostalgia card harder than perhaps we've ever seen before. Where I'd love to hear all of your opinions on this down in the comment section, but the question that I would ask is, are we being fed nostalgia as a replacement for true innovation? In other words, is there any real substance to this nostalgia wave that Adidas is currently riding, and are they potentially setting themselves up for a gigantic crash when inevitably people demand something new? It's a super interesting topic and I have a lot to share, but before we do that, if you enjoy these discussion type videos, don't forget to drop a like on this one. And if you appreciate the unsponsored, unsugar-coated, brutally honest opinions on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. Where right off the bat, I want to be clear in saying that I am not picking on Adidas. In fact, I really like what they currently have on offer. It's the strongest lineup they've had in a very long time, and when it comes to the Nike versus Adidas battle, I'd make the argument that they're currently winning, but I do have some pretty interesting observations to point out, where I think we'll start with the Predator. This is the Adidas Predator 25 Elite FT, arguably one of the most popular top-end models currently on the market, and visually one of the most distinctive football boots as well. But if we really break down what makes up the Pred 25, you have a hybrid touch upper, originally introduced in 2013 on the Predator LZ. You have rubber striking elements, originally introduced on the first Predator 31 years ago in 1994. You have the return of the fold-over flap tongue held down by an elastic strap, originally introduced in 2002 on the Predator Mania, and you have a sole plate end stud pattern that is effectively a variation of the OG Sprint frame, originally introduced in 2010 on the F50 Adizero. Where, don't get me wrong, industry standards get established, especially when it comes to football boots. I'm never going to criticize an Adidas Predator for having rubber elements that they effectively introduced to the world of football boots all those years ago. There are certain elements that make a Predator, but if we're being very cynical here and breaking down all the pieces that create the Predator 25, there isn't one single new piece of technology. In fact, the newest piece of technology is hybrid touch, which, like I mentioned, was introduced 12 years ago. Where I suppose you need to give credit where it's due, Adidas and their marketing team have done a tremendous job of putting this in everyone's face and getting people excited about a football boot with realistically no new tech. But I do kind of call into question, how long is this nostalgia wave of the new Predator simply being popular because it looks like an old Predator actually going to last? Or in other words, I guess, is there going to come a point where consumers demand more than just old school Predator styling? Where the same thing can currently be said about the F50, with this of course being the first generation of the return of the F50, but even down to the graphics and colorways, everything is either a tribute or a reference to something that Adidas have done in the past, where obviously you have a bunch of different variations of F50, but the core formula remains the same, which I guess is fair for a pair of speed boots. A really thin upper in the case of the normal variation, which admittedly is kind of up to par with what you expect from a modern pair of speed boots. In the case of the Messi variant, again, hybrid touch, originally seen on the F50 series in 2014, 11 years ago. And then effectively what's happening with the Sprint Frame 360 sole plate and stud pattern is that it is more or less a carbon copy of, again, the 2010 OG F50 Adizero, just with updated materials. Where again, I think the current F50s are great, where the philosophy of making this more like the F50 Adizero days, I think lines up with what they're currently doing, in that the OGs were relatively simple and so are the new ones. And it's harder to criticize the F50 line for a lack of innovation when they are putting out products like the F50 Plus, which is so out there that some people are just completely unwilling to try it. And again, from a tech perspective, it's one of the coolest things currently on the market. But again, Adidas is currently riding that nostalgia wave, where obviously these are less expensive than the F50 Plus, which is definitely a contributing factor. But between true innovation and things that we've seen before, the things that we've seen before are far more popular. We're not to always bring it back to a comparison between Nike and Adidas. However, they are the big two brands that most consumers are deciding between when picking out a new pair of football boots. If you were to give kudos to Nike anywhere, it's that they are definitely a brand across the board, not just in football boots, that very much commits to new technology and innovation and always doing something different than what they've done in the past. And that's not to say that Adidas offers no innovation, because that couldn't be further from the truth, but Nike as a brand is very much committed to what they want to do, even if the reception isn't always positive. And just to quickly touch on the topic of remakes, are there perhaps too many coming out these days? Absolutely. But whether it's Adidas, Nike, or any other brand for that matter, it's something that I will never get mad at. Obviously, it sucks when something comes out that everybody wants, and because it's so limited, very few people are actually able to get them, especially with all the resellers that are out there these days. But for the most part, these limited drops are there mostly for the sake of just driving hype and interest to the brand. So because they do such a good job at that, it's not surprising that we get as many remakes as we do these days. But then again, in the world of remakes, nobody is doing more than Adidas, again, riding that nostalgia wave as hard as possible. So where do they go from here? Because it's obviously difficult to fault Adidas for what they're doing right now, in that there is clear demand for the familiarity of what they've done well in the past, basically being available now in a modern interpretation. But eventually, and we know that this is how the football boot industry works, someone is going to come out with something new that inevitably everybody now wants instead of what was available before, which causes all the different brands to scramble to create something along the lines of what is now the popular and trending technology, innovation, design, whatever you want to call it. Where maybe I'm just completely off, and Adidas will continue to have huge success with this kind of modern nostalgic direction that they're going into, but I can't help but think that history repeats itself, where just 10 years ago in 2015, Predator sales were down, F50 sales were down, nobody wanted an 11 Pro, and the Nitro Charge concept just never caught on, to the point where everything was so bad that Adidas decided to wipe the slate clean and effectively start over, introducing X, Ace, and the Messi line. All of which now no longer exist, and none of which I can really see coming back as being nostalgic. Maybe the OG Pure Control, but if we're being honest, what was really that nostalgic or memorable about most of the X boots, most of the Ace boots? The Messi boots as a whole were just kind of ugly across the board, and the Nemesis line, again, just wasn't very memorable. Where undeniably, Adidas and their football boots, even the ones that weren't necessarily as successful from a sales perspective, are ingrained in football boot history. All the major tournaments were won with some of the best players in the world wearing these products. So inevitably, there are going to be stories to tell in the future if they want to do the nostalgia angle. But given what has happened in the past and what they currently have on offer, again, I'm a little bit worried for them in that this nostalgia wave better be a big one, like a tsunami or something.